There's been an update in the ongoing saga of the Nord Stream pipeline, a project controversial from start to finish. And by finish, I mean literally, because you might recall that the pipeline was blown up in 2022. So at the beginning of July, Germany's federal prosecutor charged a Ukrainian citizen with involvement in the explosion and issued a broader indictment, that he'd committed the crime at the behest of the Ukrainian government. Kyiv continues to deny all accusations, emphasizing that the Ukrainian side of the investigation is ongoing and finds no evidence yet of involvement. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv. This week, we're going to look at ongoing proceedings related to a case that's perceived in a variety of ways across Europe. For Germany, this is a national security threat unfolding like something out of a spy thriller. But for Ukraine, the act itself carries very different weight, and its investigation and interactions with media are approached with much more caution. Because even with a suspect in custody and charges leveled, the truth of who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline and why feels as shrouded in mystery as ever. Let's start with a quick refresher, because it's been about 9 months since we last had an update on this. Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were natural gas pipelines connecting Russia and Germany via the Baltic Sea. Nord Stream 1 was completed in 2012 and Nord Stream 2 was completed in 2021, just a year before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, although the latter never saw commercial use. Gas would move from Siberia through Russia's domestic piping system, would leave the Russian port of Viipuri on the Baltic Sea, and would then travel underwater through Swedish and Danish maritime jurisdictions to arrive at the German mainland. From the first announcement of its construction, the pipeline was controversial. Russia celebrated it.
It's being built, and it's being built despite all the threats. Those who initiated the sanctions are simply making a fool of themselves when they publicly declare their unwillingness to join or allow others to join a project that benefits them. In fact, it turns out that Washington was wrong to force American businessmen to turn down lucrative contracts in Russia, including in the oil and gas sector.
But critics argued that a direct line from Russia to Germany would deepen Europe's energy dependence on Moscow. And others pointed out that it would reroute Russian exports in a way that cut Ukraine out of the equation. Because until then, Ukraine had been a primary route for Russian gas transport to Europe, and this new pipeline signified a huge economic blow to Ukraine, as well as a security concern. Because rerouting gas transport out of Ukraine would then make it easier for Russia to invade, because it had already figured out a contingency for one of its major costs. It was just one of many things that in hindsight we can understand as Russia setting the stage for what was to come. Although Russia and Germany tried to bill the pipeline as purely an economic collaboration, others weren't so convinced. Ukraine was far from the only critic of the project. The Baltic states, Poland, the US, the UK, and various other EU countries all argued that it wasn't in Europe's best interest, especially regarding the construction of Nord Stream 2 in the years following Russia's annexation of Crimea and the initial invasion of Ukraine. Germany never instated the license on the newly completed pipeline in 2022 because of Russia's war, and neither Nord Stream 1 or 2 was in operation when in September of 2022, a series of explosions destroyed large segments of both pipelines.
I think the first assessments, including my own, were also shaped by the rather absurd situation that when the pipeline was blown up, or the two pipelines, Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2, were blown up, neither of these two pipelines was actually operational. So it was not actually an action that had an impact on the war or on trade, because this trade had already stopped. It was already something of the past, so to say, and Putin had already stopped the gas flowing through these pipelines, and there was no reason really for Ukraine at that point in time in September 2022 to explode this pipeline. That also then shaped the first assessments. And I suspected back then that this was actually Russian action, because Russia was in a way the beneficiary of this explosion at that point in time. If it had been 3 months before, that would have been a different matter, because then there was still gas flowing through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. But at this point in September, it was a rather confusing, actually, event, because neither of these pipelines, neither Nord Stream nor Nord Stream 2, had any economic significance anymore. There is a fundamental paradox in the German interest in these pipelines between Russia and Germany, because German foreign economic policy has been driven by so-called interdependence theory. And interdependence theory in political science means that economic ties between countries can strengthen peace, because countries that trade with each other will not go to war with each other. And there's a whole philosophy in Germany about this approach. Annäherung durch Verflechtung, rapprochement through entanglement would be translation, which is actually a valid theory. And this theory, interdependence theory, has been shown in empirical research to actually be a good predictor of war and peace. And in Germany, this project, Nord Stream, was justified with interdependence theory, although a full embrace of interdependence theory and a complete understanding of interdependence theory should have been exactly the major argument against this project, because the entanglement that the Russian-German project brought for Russia and Germany was at the expense of a disentanglement between the Russian and Ukrainian economies. First of all, this concerned the trade between the two countries, the gas trade, and the role of Ukraine as a gas transition country for Russian gas. And so if the Germans had followed their own foreign political philosophy about interdependence theory, they should have exactly not done this project, because the gas that was flowing through the Baltic Sea was not new gas. It was basically the gas that would have otherwise flown through Ukraine, that would have otherwise tied the Russian and Ukrainian economies to each other, and that would have otherwise strengthened peace between Russia and Ukraine.
What is known about the destruction of Nord Stream is that it likely required diving at depths of up to 80 meters to locate pipelines only about a meter wide. The perpetrator or perpetrators had to carry, set up, and detonate explosives at that depth and then get away safely and undetected. So from the outset, it seemed unlikely that this was carried out by anything other than professionals, a theory that was seemingly supported when professional diver Serhiy K. was arrested and taken into custody on suspicion of involvement. But even with him in custody, a clear personal motive failed to emerge, while a lot more details are yet to be established. The Kyiv Independent's reporting on Nord Stream dates back to before Russia's full-scale invasion, and it's thanks to our community that we're still here bringing you updates on it now. We're honored to be your eyes and ears here on the ground in Ukraine, and to keep tabs on things happening around the world that shape Ukraine's future. Every month, tens of thousands of people contribute a small amount to help keep our independent reporting alive. And it's thanks to viewers like you that we can produce the articles, videos, and other products you love. And there are many ways that you can get involved. For more information, visit the link in the description below. As I alluded to in the intro, Germany has become the most adamant in its version of events in recent weeks. The German federal prosecutor alleges that Serhiy K., the Ukrainian citizen in custody who's charged with involvement, is just one of a 7-person team. The team was allegedly made up of 4 divers, 1 explosives expert, 1 skipper, and a group leader. Germany says that Serhiy K. was this group leader, and that he's actually a former Ukrainian military officer. They claim that the whole operation was conducted on the orders of the Ukrainian state. And as of this month, that's being said openly by German prosecutors. Throughout the proceedings, there have been multiple attempts by the media to connect high-profile Ukrainians to the case, from President Volodymyr Zelensky to former Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny. There's no reliable public information that ties either of them, or anyone else of that level of public notoriety, to this case. And to be honest, if there was, we would be hearing much more about it. That is to say, Germany doesn't allege that Zelensky himself ordered the destruction of the pipeline, and at this point they say that they don't know how high up the command came from. We asked Ukraine's general prosecutor for comment, and received a written statement claiming that based on the results of the work already carried out and the information received, at present no facts have been established that would indicate the involvement of the Ukrainian state in the sabotage. To order an act of outright sabotage in an international zone like the Baltic Sea, where multiple countries have some degree of jurisdiction, would be a heavy lift. And to be clear, by the very nature of its magnitude, it's hard to imagine it being approved at any level much lower than the president. But despite Germany's unequivocal wording, Kyiv maintains that its investigation is ongoing. The case will likely go to trial in Hamburg this fall, where German prosecutors will present evidence for their claims about Ukrainian state involvement. But, as I said earlier, Nord Stream wasn't commercially functional when it was blown up, and at no point was it the singular route in Russian energy transport. Gas continues to move to Europe without it. So if Germany's case proved correct, what would Ukraine stand to gain from it being blown up 6 months into Russia's full-scale invasion? The attack could be read as insurance against Europe changing its mind about weaning itself off of Russian energy, but that's a bit ephemeral. It would mean committing an extremely difficult maneuver to prevent the possibility of a future reversal of course. The destruction of the pipeline could be read more specifically as a blow to Germany-Russia relations, in the form of removing a notable point of common ground between the two, but again, a bit abstract a goal for such a targeted move. Because at heart, whoever blew up the pipeline had to believe that destroying it would be worth the substantial risk of being discovered, and there still isn't a clear line to draw from any one beneficiary to the explosion. But are there any alternate explanations to Ukrainian involvement? Well, there aren't a ton of other leading theories. It doesn't really make sense for Russia to have done it as anything other than a false flag operation, and there isn't evidence linking them to it. So it's not impossible, there just isn't a clear motive beyond framing Ukraine. Several arguments were put forward about the CIA being behind the explosions, but again, the evidence just isn't there, and the theories just get more obscure from there. The account of this case definitely varies depending on who you ask, and nowhere is this clearer than in different countries' media. In Germany's mainstream publications, the pipeline explosion is treated as a targeted and authorized act of sabotage that threatens national security. In Ukraine, it's far from priority number one. An act of sabotage, yes, but not one upon which huge stakes hinge on finding the culprit. Many Ukrainians opposed the pipeline being built in the first place, and few are clamoring for justice on its behalf. But if it seems like a battle of wills, Germany sharpening its rhetoric, Ukraine denying responsibility, and the proceedings just plodding on, it's worth noting that this issue could prove high stakes when it comes to public opinion. The Nord Stream case is a point of tension between Ukraine and Germany, at a time when the leading German far-right party is operating on a platform of anti-Ukrainian sentiment. So in the lead-up to parliamentary elections this fall, it's likely that this party will use Nord Stream as so-called evidence that Germany should cut off all aid to Ukraine entirely. Ukraine can't afford to lose powerful allies in Europe, and can't afford to give this kind of ammo to its critics. The Nord Stream case will likely continue to be a problematic thorn in Kyiv's side for at least the remainder of this year, probably longer. Because in the end, the destruction of Nord Stream wasn't the thing that definitively ended Russian gas transit to Europe. That end still hasn't been achieved. Rather, it was a symbolic act of severance, and the reactions afterwards speak most to the economic interests of the parties involved. The countries who stood to gain the most from the pipeline are angry about its destruction, and those who felt the trade-off wasn't worth it to begin with have been much slower to call for justice. That indignation at a lost economic boost can easily translate into public outrage for the voting public in not just Germany, but various other European countries that still rely on Russian fuel. And while none of us can say how the trial is going to turn out, or what will be revealed, or how it will shape public opinion, it seems more likely than not that the full truth is still far away. The question now is just how much of a fallout Ukraine will continue to suffer in this ongoing, unsolved mystery. Our member question this week comes from our community member Maxime, and the question is, has the German public prosecutor general potentially already lost in this case? Although reports indicate that Ukraine's government was behind it, the contact with and between high-ranking officials in Ukraine would all be done verbally. Sweden and Denmark have closed their investigations with no conclusions. Poland is actively working against the investigation, and Ukraine fully denies everything. So to me, it would seem like there is a lack of enough judicially valid evidence to credibly incriminate the suspects. Okay, so to this, I'd say that we ultimately don't know how the trial will play out, and at heart, it's not the trial of the whole operation, but just one suspect. So even if they find Serhiy K. guilty of involvement, there's still a long way to go to prove that he was acting on the orders of any government. The evidence around the diving team is largely circumstantial, and if there are classified details waiting to be revealed at trial, they're likely not the kind that would definitively answer big questions of institutional involvement, because otherwise we'd probably have more of a sense of that already. So no, the trial this fall is not necessarily a dead end if the objective is to try Serhiy K. for involvement, but it is very unlikely to provide evidence for the German claims of Ukrainian state involvement. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's truly thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.